Morning, everyone. Many faces that I know and others I do not. My name is Bodhidasa, and it is a great honor for me to introduce this man. This man is Saraha, and first and foremost, he is a good man. He is a very good man, first and foremost. He's also an agent provocateur. He likes to question. He likes to question reality. He likes to question assumptions. He likes to question views. But mostly he likes to be present with you in the midst of difficulties and in the midst of your joys, and he likes to be fully present. And there are very few people I've met who are actually like that. The connection I have with Saraha is that in 2014, he was one of the support and co-leaders of my ordination course in Spain. So for 4 months, I sat at the other end of the room, intimidated by him. Now, it wasn't because he was scary or particularly abrupt or unapproachable. In fact, he was completely approachable. But as I said, he questions. He questions everything. And I think he questions my motives in wanting to be his friend. I doubt he'll quiz you and provoke you as much as he did for the 4 months that we were living together. But behind those questions and behind the smile and behind those eyes, he has a very wicked smile. Behind the wickedness is a deep care for others and an absolute passionate love for the Dharma. He's now risen to a or descended, depending on how you might consider it. He now bears the burden of being the convener of our entire order, and I don't just mean here in Sydney. I mean in every country,
along with Avia Jaya.
Yes, indeed, and that is a great honor and a great responsibility and a burden, I suspect, but one that I know that he'll bring that sense of care and questioning. We'll bring that to the order, and we will all benefit from it, whether you're in the order or in the periphery or supporting us. So it's a great honor. We've already had your wisdom this morning, and I'm very much looking forward to more. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Hello. Yeah, I'll just respond to that. This new job that I've taken on, I don't think I'm not actually responsible for anything. I'm responsible for the job title is convener, order convener, international order convener. So the responsibility is to convene, to bring people together. You know, I'm not responsible for people's going for refuge or or harmony or ethical practice or anything, but I do have a responsibility to try and ensure that members of the order particularly have the conditions they need to practice and conditions they need to be in harmony and to deepen their friendships, their practice, their communication to the extent that I can. You know, I'm just an order member. I need to convene myself.
That was a bit loud, Kamalabhai.
Don't worry, I've muted myself.
Hello, nice to see you. And yeah, I can be challenging and provocative, but I can be very challenging and provocative to myself as well. And I think that's when I started off on the spiritual path, it was because I found life just so boring. And I found the interactions that passed for friendship just to be so superficial and just seemed meaningless. So I was on a quest to find deeper connection, and I did that through Buddhism, through, you know, if you want to connect deeply with people, then it helps if you and they can sit in silence with their stuff to get to know themselves, for me to get to know myself, and then we can communicate on the basis of knowing it ourselves a bit more. So I think that sort of links in with what you said. And yeah, getting to know yourself, it's always a challenge, isn't it? It's a huge challenge. It's always a challenge. And it's always, yeah, it just sitting quietly with yourself provokes stuff. It provokes what doesn't want to be seen to try and hide or try and defend itself, or, yeah, blame other people for stuff. And so, yeah, I really love that. Okay, so I'll say a bit more about this text. We're looking at a text from the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the middle-length discourses of the Pali canon. And as I said in the first half, this is what's called a pericope. Triratna, we have a lot of pericopes. They're a bit embarrassing. I wish we didn't. A pericope is when somebody says something, in this case, mentions the word meditation, and you just say something that you've said 100 times before in response. That's called a pericope. Yeah. And we really should stop doing it. If somebody asks us a question about meditation or Buddhism, we should stop and think before we answer, rather than just giving the answer that we've learned. Yeah. I do that. We all do that. We give the answers that we've learned. I taught for many years in the UK, and I just got fed up of hearing my own voice. I got fed up of hearing myself saying the same things. You know, I was teaching several times a week for 10 years, and so it's hard not to say the same things. And so I left and went. The last 6 years I've been living a more meditative sort of life. Very busy life as well, but more just sort of trying to find the fountain, the source of where I can communicate from. And then 6 years later, I start teaching again, and I find myself saying the same sentences that I was saying 6 years ago. It's very embarrassing, and wanting to say the same sort of things. So it's a huge challenge. Anyway, so this is a pericope. Pali canon is full of pericopes, as I said, with sort of repetitive or rote ways of explaining a subject. Partly because the Pali canon was an oral tradition for probably 500 years. It was an exclusively oral tradition for probably about 500 years before it was written down. And since then, it's been a mixture of an oral tradition and a written tradition. So that means that monks and nuns would get together and they would tell the story of what the Buddha was like. And they got to the point where they could all tell the story in unison. They could tell it together. Yeah? Which means if anyone makes a mistake, it sticks out like a sore thumb, because everyone knows the story. Once it started to get written down, a lot more mistakes started to arise in these texts. So in some ways, it got less reliable when it got written down, partly because it was written down in a very damp environment like Sydney. That is my experience of Sydney. It's a very damp place. So yeah, these texts were written down on leaves in a damp environment. They don't last very long, so they'd need recopying every year or three. Mistakes would get made. Anyway, so whenever the Buddha was asked about meditation, he would talk about the 4 dhyanas, or the 8 dhyanas. And I mentioned a bit about the first one in the first half. And I'll just reread what I read at the start of the meditation. Tireless energy was aroused in me, and unremitting mindfulness was established. So meditation is about energy. It's not about just relaxing. It's about energy. It's about an application of energy. It's not an application of the sort of frantic energy that we often get into when we're using a computer, but it's an energy, more like doing art, or more maybe sport. It's the sort of energy that's got love in it and got pleasure in it. It's the energy of a child playing with its favorite friend. Yeah, there's no need to tell the child not to be distracted. The child is just doing what it loves doing. Yeah? Tireless energy was aroused in me, and unremitting mindfulness was established. My body was tranquil and untroubled. And thinking of that when we were meditating just before, broadly speaking, our bodies were untroubled. We weren't having people coming and tapping us on the shoulder and asking us to send emails, or asking us to feed them, or asking us to do things. Our bodies were pretty much untroubled by external things. Yeah? Whether our bodies were tranquil, I've got bad neck, my body wasn't untroubled internally, but it was fairly untroubled externally, despite the fact that I was anxiously anticipating what you were going to say about me. So yeah, tireless energy was aroused in me, and unremitting mindfulness was established, saying that he'd done the work, he'd done some work to get to that point of meditating. Yeah. My body was tranquil and untroubled, my mind concentrated and unified. Yeah. So again, concentrated is, think of the concentration of a child playing rather than the concentration of a school teacher telling you to concentrate on the alphabet or whatever it is. You're concentrated on something because you want to be concentrated on it, because it's enjoyable, yeah? Because it's pleasant. And unified means all of your energies are coming there together. Yeah. Again, the child playing, there's not, it's not having to deliberately let go of the need to go back and do its homework. That's just a million miles away. Yeah. All of its energies are unified on the game or the play. When we can meditate like that, we're in a real sweet spot, and we don't have to struggle. We're not fighting anything, because our energies are unified. And then it says, quite secluded from sensual pleasures. And as I said in the first half, that means secluded from sensuous input. We've got the 5 physical senses. Yeah? It's not the quietest of shrine rooms, but the sounds that are happening, hopefully they're fairly neutral. Yeah, they're not someone asking us to do something. They're not strongly pleasant or unpleasant. They might be if you've got certain history or whatever, but quite secluded from sensual pleasures means that you've just put yourself, you've chosen to come here or to join online. You've chosen to do that. You've probably turned your phone onto aeroplane mode or something. You've chosen to be here knowing that you're going to sit quietly with your eyes closed. So you've secluded yourself from sensory input. You've done that. You've chosen to do that. Secluded from unwholesome states. So in Buddhism, the real strong practice of ethics, the real strong practice, the importance of ethics, of ethics is a way of stopping self-harming, to put it bluntly. That's what ethics is in Buddhism. Stopping self-harming, yeah, stopping doing things that cause you harm, doing things that cause other people harm, which is painful to oneself. If you've ever been mindful of that event when you've done something and you realize that you've upset somebody, it's so painful. Yeah, it's so painful. We have to really practice diligently and live diligently and carefully to do that less and less and less. You know, I've noticed myself do it already a few times today. Yeah, saying something, doing something, a gesture, a tone of a look of my eye, or that did or maybe caused someone a bit uncomfortableness. Yeah. I did it deliberately to you for 4 months, of course.
Yes. My sins, thank you.
Secluded from unwholesome states. Yeah. So yeah, that's a practice. We're protecting ourselves from our own negativity. The path of Buddhism is we're moving towards a space where a life where we are protecting ourselves from our own ill will, hatred, craving. Yeah, the Metta Bhavana is the classic example. Develop love for yourself. Protect yourself from unwholesome states towards yourself. Yeah, that's a negative way of putting it. Secluded from unwholesome states. You could say that in another way round and say, wallow in love. Yeah. Plunge like an elephant into a pool of wholesomeness, yeah? Of love and appreciation and generosity and kindness. Yeah? Don't seclude yourself from that. Seclude yourself from unwholesome states so you can fully immerse yourself in wholesome states. And yeah, if you come to the Buddhist Center regularly, a huge part of what our Buddhist Center is about is exploring what is wholesomeness, what is a wholesome state for a human being in the 21st century in this dampest of cities. Yep. So that's setting up conditions, and then the text goes on. I entered upon and abided in. Yeah. So there's two words there: to enter on and abide in. I remember someone once saying it's really hard to be rich, financially rich. Yeah. Actually, it's really easy to be rich. It's hard to get rich. Yeah. Once you're rich, it's easy to be rich. But is that true? It's not. Because once you're rich, you know, a lot of people, when they get rich, they just get a bigger house and a bigger car, and their outgoings increase. So it's hard to stay rich if you get rich. To enter on and abide in the first dhyana, I think a lot of people experience it's relatively easy to enter the first dhyana. It's actually quite hard to stay there. Yeah. So those two words are really significant. Partly what I'm doing now, I'm showing you how I read the Pali canon. Yeah. If you ever want to read this book, do it in this way. Look at every word. Don't just read it like a novel. Yeah. Why does it say enter on and abide in? It's not just Buddha being, you know, enjoying those words. They both mean something. Yeah. So to enter on and abide in the first dhyana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought. There isn't really an agreement in the Buddhist tradition as to what that means, applied and sustained thought. You can take it literally as thought, thinking. I know someone who translates it as applied and sustained energy. Yeah. In the commentary to this by Buddha Ghosha, he describes applied thought as taking a pot and putting it under a tap, and sustained thought, holding it there. Okay. Or another one, applied thought, is the crow. We hear some wonderful crows in this city, don't we? A crow jumping off a hillside and doing that. That's applied thought. Sustained thought is when it's doing that. Or maybe a bit of flapping as well, maybe having to continue. But it's about continuing the effort, sustaining the effort. So that's applied and sustained thought. There's an interesting parallel there. I entered upon and abided in the first dhyana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought. You see the parallel? I've never noticed it before. I noticed it now that I'm talking about this. Yeah. To enter upon is applied thought. To enter upon, to put the jar underneath the tap. To abide in the first dhyana is to hold it there. Right? So you could say any of the dhyanas are about entering the dhyana and staying there. In the first dhyana, that includes some thinking. Yeah? That includes some thinking. For example, right, I'm going to meditate. I'm going to focus on my breath. That's an applied thought. That's deciding with thoughts what I'm going to do. Yeah? I'm quite distracted. I've been quite busy. So I'm going to need to pay attention to my body and relax. That's applied thought. Yeah? Sustained thought is, okay, keep coming back to the body. Oh, I went off, come back to the body. So I'm thinking, I'm using my rational mind, I'm using my thinking processes to enter upon and abide in the first dhyana. Yeah? And once you are in the first dhyana, you can continue to use the thinking process to do that. Yeah? I recently stopped being a monolinguist. When I was 47, I only spoke English, and I decided to stop that. And so now I speak Spanish as well, not perfectly, but reasonably. And I speak it well enough to notice that when you're a monolinguist, when you only have one language, the relationship between knowing something and having words for it are really stuck together. When you've got two languages, you've got three things. You've got the knowing of it, and I could put that in English, or I could put that in Spanish. So you've got the knowledge sort of three times. Yeah? When you're a monolinguist, you've actually got it twice. But it's really hard to see that if you only speak one language. Why am I saying that? Sustained thought. Why am I saying that? Oh yeah, thinking and language. Yeah, so we're using language to get to the knowing what we're doing. Yeah, in the second dhyana, the thinking disappears. There's still applied and sustained something, but it's no longer applied and sustained thought. Yeah? So in the higher dhyanas, you're still, I wasn't planning on making this class about dhyanas, but that's something I started talking about. You're still making an effort. You know, it goes right back to the start of this little extract. Tireless energy. You're still making an effort. When you're in a meditative state and there's no words, you're still making an effort and you're still making choices, yeah? Which again is hard to get your head around if you're a monolinguist. It's easier to get your head around if you've got a clearer separation in your imagination between knowledge and language. Yeah? The fact that you can make choices, make decisions without words. Yeah. And here's the interesting bit that we're getting to now. So with the stilling, all that, I entered one and abided in the first dhyana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought. Interesting, accompanied by. Yeah? Accompanied by. I won't say any more about that, but it's an interesting. I've never noticed that either. It's not that it has that. It's accompanied by that. Interesting. With rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So this is what I thought of when I thought of doing this class, was talking about rapture and pleasure, and beauty. Rapture and pleasure are very, very beautiful states. Yeah, rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So rapture and pleasure that arrives naturally, they're born naturally when we're secluded. Yeah? And you can remember what we're secluded from. We're secluded from the barrage of input through our senses, and we're secluded from our own negative propensities, our unwholesome states. If we seclude ourselves from the barrage of input, and we seclude ourselves from our own negative habits of unethical craving and hatred, selfish I want and selfish I don't like, then quite naturally this pleasure and this rapture and pleasure will arise. They are born of that seclusion. You don't need to force them to arise. The effort is around setting up the conditions for them to arise. I've talked for a bit longer than I thought I would. I started off thinking I had nothing more to say after the first half. Let's not get into breakout groups, but if anyone's got any questions or thoughts or comments.
You talked about, excuse me, you talked about secluding yourself from your negative internal states. Can you say a bit more about that?
Anyone else? Do you want to say anything about that?
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
I agree with you. It can be a challenge if that's what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about, are you just talking about labeling them and letting go? Is that the process, or what's the process of doing that?
Yeah. I think just secluding it's temporary seclusion. And that's often the dhyanas talked about as a temporary suppression of the hindrances. So you're not secluding yourself from them for good. You're not cutting off that part of yourself. It's like, if you've got an argument going on with someone in your life, come on, give yourself a break. 20 minutes meditation every day where you're not going to think about it. Seclude yourself from it for that time. And then when you go back to it, you'll have more clarity. That's one way of looking at it. So you're secluding yourself from the problems of your life in order to be able to go back to them with more clarity. But you're also secluding yourself from the problems of your life in order just to love being alive. You are not your problems. You are not your negative mental states. They can become habitual. And it's a great question. How do you actually do it? So many of us, myself included, can be just wrapped up in the stories, the negative, they said this and they are bad and and I must get them to realize how bad they are and blah, 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 all this nonsense. How you actually work on that is a huge part of the spiritual life.
So being on retreat, you don't live on retreat. Well, some people are lucky enough to do it, but you make a decision to not be invested in that.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. Make a decision not to be invested in it. Another way of putting that, don't take it too seriously. Buddhism does say work on your stuff, but it also says you don't have a fixed self. It also says none of it is finally real. It's not unreal. It's definitely not unreal. It is relevant, but it's not finally real. Your negative mental states are not what's going to be written on your tombstone, hopefully. They're not. They don't need to define you. They need to be taken seriously, but taken seriously just like any passing phenomena needs to be taken seriously. I'm joking that Sydney is a really wet city. Obviously, it isn't. Yeah,
You
I
can't
know
move the
that.
skies
Yeah,
today.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But it's easy for me to think, oh, Sydney's a wet city. Oh, I'm in a bad mood. Oh, I'm depressed today. It's so easy to think, oh, I'm always depressed. Sydney, it's always raining. I'm always miserable. It's not true. Was there another? And so, yeah, it's work. It's work. And it involves just the discipline of, no, I'm not going to think about that. But it also involves, and that isn't real. It isn't fully, it's not to be ignored, but it's not fully real. Was there, you had a...
Yeah, so my question was around, you use words like rapture, bliss. Do you think that very strong sensations? Can you sort of talk about the intensity of this bodily sensations? Is there? Imagine there would be a range.
Yeah.
For me, if I experience anything like that, would usually be quite subtle. Definitely pleasant, but very subtle.
Yeah. So one pattern that's actually quite common is that people get into meditation, and after a few minutes or a few decades, they experience some rapture for the first time. And it's like being on a roller coaster. It's really intense. Yeah. And then a bit later, they're still experiencing it, but it's really subtle. And they think, oh, I wish I could get back to what it was like before. But it wasn't better. It wasn't more intense before. It was just new. Yeah. That's often the way. And then people I know people that, who've been meditating for 30 years, and they're trying to get back to that first experience of their first retreat. It's like, come on. It's not like that. It's like your first love. You're not going to repeat that intensity. Not because you're never going to meet someone as wonderful and as special, just because it's not going to be the first time again. And with the progression in this, the first jhana, rapture and pleasure, which is pretty, which is the fizzy Coke bottle, which is, quite intense. In the second jhana, that begins to die away. Yeah. And rather than having that right in your face as the most intense thing, you can't think of anything else. You don't notice the breath anymore because there's all this pretty going on. Then you just start, after a while, you start to notice, oh, well, there is all this pretty going on, and the breathing is also happening. And and then you can begin to notice there is a subtle happiness behind it. Yeah? And the happiness is much more subtle. It's much less sexy. It's much less exciting and spiritual, but it's actually much more powerful. Does that get anywhere near your question?
I think it does. Yeah.
Let me just say one other thing in relation to that. The spiritual path, in particular, the spiritual path and the meditation path, it's about becoming more carefully attuned to subtle states. Yeah. It's relatively easy. It's not easy. It's relatively easy to focus on the breath when you're counting at the end of the breath. Yeah. It's a little bit harder to focus on the breath when you're counting at the beginning of the breath. It's a little bit harder to focus on the breath without counting. It's a little bit harder to focus on the breath here, for most people, not always. Yeah? It's a little bit harder to let go of the breath and focus on rapture and pleasure. It's harder because it's more subtle. We're used to looking at bright, flashing screens whilst listening to music and texting someone. Yeah? We're used to quite intense life. We used to watch some Hollywood movies. Life's not like Hollywood movies. Life is much more subtle. And meditation is about learning to stay with the subtleties. We don't need drama. The love that comes after the falling in love bit it requires a different type of attention to stay with it and to stay valuing it. Yeah. And if you always want to get back to being in the falling in love bit of a relationship, you're going to be a serial monogamist. You're not going to have a gradually deepening, gradually getting more subtle relationship with another person. Same with meditation. If you want the sexy, dramatic, exciting meditation experiences, yeah, come here for a few months, then go somewhere else for a few months, then go somewhere else for a few months. That's how it'll probably go. If you want to go deeper and deeper until you have a mind a body that's tranquil and untroubled, and a mind that's concentrated and unified, you need to get used to paying more subtle attention to the ordinary things of life. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant. You had your hand up.
Actually, it goes to what you were saying about being more subtle. It was just a comment I did notice very interestingly, because you said look for the joy, basically.
Yeah.
The pleasure, which is not something I really normally do. I found even the painful bits, I was focusing on when I was uncomfortable, on the uncomfortable bits, even that searching was pleasurable.
Brilliant. That's it. Yeah. Even the uncomfortable bit, even pain, if you have a subtlety of attention, kind awareness, that kind awareness can be very pleasant. Yeah. It's like being with somebody who's really upset. The tenderness and love that one feels when one with someone who's really upset could be so beautiful. Yeah, no, really nice, really well noticed. See that there's a subtlety of attention. You notice something which surprised you. Yeah. That's what I said right at the start. Let's surprise ourselves. Let's pay attention and let's surprise each other. Yeah.
I noticed Clifford's had his hand up. Sorry to.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Clifford, if you wanted to have a chat.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I think for me, there was something paradoxical about the pleasure of meditation, in that became a kind of craving, because early on in my meditation, I was meditating for years until I realized that I had this sort of Protestant austere idea that it had to be hard and earnest, and I think it went back to my first night right there in that room doing introduction to meditation, and had a whiteboard saying, what is meditation and what isn't meditation, and it's not sitting blissed out on a beach in Bali, it is this, that, and the other, and that stuck in my head, sort of saying, if you're starting to feel some sort of pleasure about it, you're getting it wrong, so move away from that. And so I love what you say, we're talking about wallowing in love and finding the pleasurable side of it, but there's something about not craving that as well, that I'm sort of talking around, and you might be able to flesh out a bit for me.
Yeah. No, that's actually that's quite common in a lot of Buddhist traditions. Yeah, that there's a fear of pleasure in meditation. There's a caution towards pleasure in meditation. Yeah.
I think some of it also came from like a Christian or the whole Western upbringing too, which says you're broken and you must be fixed.
Yeah.
And not rather that you have Buddha nature and that this is something to bring out and celebrate, that there's something fundamentally good, but there's something fundamentally wicked that you have to try and repair.
Yeah. I think that can be true. For us people from monotheistic or Christian, especially backgrounds, there can be a bit of unlearning to do regarding religion. Buddhism is about the higher hedonism. Buddhism is about moving from lower pleasures to higher pleasures. Yeah, that's what the Buddha taught, how to move from lower pleasure to higher pleasure, which means to more refined, more subtle pleasures. There can also be a guilt that comes with that. Yeah. Why can I be all blissed out when there's people out there in Newtown suffering on the streets? Great, if that comes up, great, go out there and help them, and come back and meditate and refuel yourself with love and bliss and Buddha nature, and then go out and help people and try and make the world a better, safer place. One other thing that I was going to say in response to that, the danger of getting attached to the bliss of meditation. I've seen it once or twice. I've been at this for 25, 30 years. I've hung around with an awful lot of meditators. I've seen it once or twice that someone's got attached to the pleasure of meditation in an unhelpful way. So do be careful, but really don't worry, go for it.
It's
Really.
err on the side of the pleasure.
Yeah. If you know the Buddha's life story, he did 7 years, it's not just us. I'm speaking for myself, ex-Christian. It's not just people like me. The Buddha spent 7 years of wearing a hair shirt, to use a Christian image. Yeah, the Buddha spent 7 years of austerities until he nearly died of starvation and weakness. And then he had a memory of when he was a child. Interestingly, he was a child. He was playing, and he remembered being a child playing and being in a really pleasant, blissful state, and he thought that wasn't unwholesome. That was pleasure, and it wasn't unwholesome. We're all familiar with pleasure that is unwholesome. Let's also get familiar with pleasure that isn't unwholesome. The pleasure that isn't unwholesome is a hell of a lot more pleasurable than the pleasure of ice cream. Yeah, it's a lot better than ice cream. The rapture and the pleasure of meditation. Yeah, it's not unwholesome, and it's not as addictive. Yeah, it can get you can get a healthy attachment to it. I was careful when I said that. It's once or twice I've seen it lead towards an unhealthy attachment. I've seen a lot of people get a very healthy attachment to meditation and dedicate a lot of time and money to going on retreats and going to Buddhist centers and teaching other people to meditate because they know how damn good it is and how useful it is. Yeah? If that's the attachment that it leads to, bring it on. Yeah. And if you do find yourself getting stuck up your backside because you're so blissed out, do listen to your friends when they say, come on, get a bit real. It's unlikely to happen, but it might, and it might happen for a few weeks or a few months after your first dhyanic retreat. You might find yourself